Hello, I'm John Perry, and welcome to Representative Gary Glenn Reports. And I'm joined today from Representative Gary Glenn's office by Mike Goschka. Mike, it's good to see you again.
Well, thank you, John. It is great to be here. Thank you.
Obviously, you're a longtime veteran of the Michigan Legislature, both in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. You've been working with Representative Glenn in his office now for pushing almost a year and a half. Obviously, Representative Glenn's office and the work he has done has received a variety of recognition, both at home and here at the state capitol, too. The bottom line is that what Representative Gary Glenn is doing, though, is being the voice for his people whom he listens to at home back here in Lansing.
Well, that's true, and unfortunately, I guess with being a veteran comes age, and so that suggests I'm getting older, which I certainly am. But I will tell you, when I first started working for Representative Glenn, I was excited about the prospects of coming back to Lansing and to show him some things perhaps initially that as a new legislator he may not know, but I was so amazed and pleased to see how quickly he grasped what being a legislator is all about. And he has been viewed here in Lansing by his colleagues, by journalists, by lobbyists, by everybody in this town as a person to watch. In fact, he was tabbed early by MERS, the Michigan Information Research Services, as a legislator to watch. And then they went after a full year of service, because of his work mainly on energy issues for the people of this state, they named him as Freshman Legislator of the Year. And I will tell you, I'd love to be able to take credit for that, but I can't take any. He just took off in this job, and not only does he work Lansing hard, but he works his district hard. He goes to meetings, he responds to phone calls, he does his job, and it shows. And he has received a number of accolades as a result of his hard work as a state legislator representing Midland and Bay counties.
Representative Glenn, of course, has distinguished himself as a conservative lawmaker, and certainly no one is going to accuse him of checking his ideals at the door. But at the same time, he's also a man who has been open to working with people on the other side of the aisle.
Well, he has done that, and that's one thing that when I first began to realize this is a man that listens to all perspectives. And he had showed that with his work with Representative Jeff Irwin, someone from Ann Arbor. And Jeff has proven himself, I think, to be a very wonderful person to work with. And he and Representative Glenn, along with a couple others, have sponsored some legislation dealing with community gardening in the area of energy. And they've worked well together. Just yesterday, Mayor Mike Duggan of Detroit came into the office to talk about the DPS issue. And certainly, while Mayor Duggan made a compelling case and clearly presents himself in such a manner that he makes good points, at the same time, I know that Representative Glenn is very concerned about the prospects of accountability in anything that's done with DPS. But this is just the way he carries himself. He has a very good working relationship, not only with his colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle, but certainly on the Democrat side as well, and in the other chamber, in the Senate. And that's how you get good things done in Lansing, is building relationships. And I tell you what, that's a capital R when it comes to Gary Glenn.
You talked about DPS and the issue of accountability, and I would have to imagine that is something, Representative Glenn, something you as well are hearing from folks back in the district who maybe see a need for some type of state involvement, but there needs to be that accountability there too.
Well, yes, we're hearing from a number of people in the district that while they recognize that, yes, the Constitution is clear, that in the whole area of funding for our public schools, Detroit to some degree is in our lap, whether we like it or not. The fact is, Representative Glenn is leading the charge to ensure that before something passes the chamber, there's going to be safeguards. It isn't just about pouring money on an issue we would find ourselves back in the same situation again, no question about it. He wants to have legislation that's common sensed, that's reasoned, that's not punitive, but points in the direction of truly educating the children of Detroit and ensuring that the taxpayer dollar is spent wisely and not on anything else other than education.
You talk about listening to the folks back in the district too, and I'm always amazed when I talk to Representative Glenn that quite often it could be 5 o'clock when we're talking here, but he's heading right back to the district to visit a meeting, visit somebody at their home, stop by somebody's business, stop by somebody's farm. There's always something going on.
Well, there is. There's 91,000 people in the district. You're talking not only the city of Midland, the city of Auburn, the city of Pinconning, and the village of Sanford, but 13 other townships. And, these are honest, hardworking, everyday people that have issues and concerns, and they're taxpayers, and they care about their families, and they care about their children and their grandchildren. And we have issues coming up agriculturally. It could be something to do with businesses, dealing with an issue with the Treasury Department. Whatever the issue is, he has told myself and my cohort that I work with in the office, our charge is to address these issues as quickly as possible, to serve the constituents in the best way possible, to always treat people with respect, to listen to their concerns. And that's a charge we take seriously. And just to follow his example is pretty easy to do.
One issue the representative has done a lot of work on this term is the issue of energy, maybe more specifically, energy choice. That's really been an area where he's very much been a leader, not just on the House Energy Committee, but really in the entire legislature at the Capitol.
It is not a stretch for me to say that Representative Gary Glenn in this town and throughout the state, for those who know, is Mr. Energy. There's no question about it. There are some bills that initially appeared that they were just going to fly. They were going to pass through like a freight train. But he recognized that from his perspective, the issue of the free market was really not being honored or looked out for. And he cares about the ultimate prices that people pay. He doesn't want just affordable rates for electricity for residentials and for hospitals and schools and businesses. He wants competitive rates. That would bring them down even more so. He believes strongly that the retail market, if people are able to come in and to compete with the utilities in offering their services, it will drop the rates. And that's been proven by past years. What we've had in the state of Michigan before we went to the current mix of a 10% retail choice and 90% monopoly, you might say, by the utilities. Before that, when we had open market completely, we were below the national average. And now we're above the national average. And we can change that. And Representative Gary Glenn has led the charge with his colleagues, and they're listening to him. And that's the thing I appreciate. They're listening to him strongly in making sure that we have retail choice, which will drop the rates for everyone in our state.
And Mike, during your time at the Capitol and today, education funding has always been a key issue. How do we get more money into our classrooms? And Representative Glenn has made the case that one way you can do that is energy choice for our schools.
John, you raise a very good point. Right now, because of the fact that we have a 10% ability for various entities to participate in choice, and the other 90% can't, by law, that 40% of the schools in our state right now are exercising savings. They're seeing savings in their tax dollars, and rather than have to pay it toward energy bills, it can go in the classroom. And Representative Glenn takes the perspective that if 40% of the schools, because of choice, can save money, why would we not open that up to all schools? Why would we not open that up to hospitals and residential?
You can definitely extend that argument, can't you?
In every fashion. Absolutely. That's been what he's done. In fact, in great part, not entirely because of that, but in great part, the reason he has been named Freshman Legislator of the Year by MERS is because they recognized this is the one man who honestly, by himself, he had a lot of help, but as he pulled them together, but he stopped a freight train that was just going to pass a bill that was going to actually completely eliminate all of the retail choice market in the state of Michigan.
And, we talk about jobs. We talk about economic development. Companies moving in to Michigan look at the cost of energy. Someone maybe wanting to set up a new small business in your community is going to look at the cost of energy. There's a link to education. Certainly there is a link to economic development as well.
Well, there is. One of the things that Representative Glenn has made a priority of his as well is the issue of job creation. We are very fortunate to have in Midland the Dow Chemical Company. We have Dow Corning Corporation. That's where I used to work at one time. Enjoyed every single day of my working at Dow Corning and will forever be grateful. We have MCV, Midland Cogeneration Venture. And we have many businesses throughout the whole region. And one of the things that we wouldn't think about perhaps if we don't own a business is the exorbitant costs of energy. And that's why even with Midland Cogeneration Venture, all that they do and all of their capacity, the more they could actually offer greater capacity at lower rates. And so when you really realize the savings in other businesses that are looking potentially at coming to Michigan, I will tell you right now, if Representative Glenn's initiatives on energy are realized, we will see many businesses. There will be a boom in employment in the state of Michigan, and we'll see that unemployment rate drop drastically. I realize now, because of the efforts of Representative Glenn and his colleagues, that the unemployment rate, thankfully, is dropping consistently, and it's now below the national average. Hadn't seen that in a long time, but it'll drop markedly if his initiatives on energy are realized.
And I would think, too, Mike, that those initiatives reflect a reality that Representative Glenn listens not only to the corporate executive, but also to that small businessman, small businesswoman at the corner coffee table, at the corner coffee shop.
That's exactly the name of the game. We appreciate our large businesses. How can you not? They employ a lot of people. But it's the majority of people work for small businesses.
Those small businesses.
If we don't protect our small businesses, if we don't look out for their best interest, which is really looking out for the best interest of the whole state, then we're lacking. We're missing the mark. And that's something that, as you suggest, John, Representative Glenn has made a major priority to look out not just for the Dow Chemicals and the Dow Cornings and the MCVs, but throughout his whole district, the businesses, and the restaurants, and all of the economic activity. He's going to be speaking at Pinconning tomorrow morning to the chamber, to the Pinconning-Linwood Chamber, talking to them about economic development. And I know the DDA there is working on refacing the facades of all the buildings in downtown. They're working on their park. It's city-owned. They had lost Magline some years ago, a company that is highly regarded, but then they pulled a coup by getting IPEG right back in there. And I know that Dick Byrne, the city manager and the city council, worked very hard at getting IPEG into that position so that there's jobs being created. And so that's what it's about. It is about giving people in the district, and in this case, the 98th district, Midland and Bay counties, a real opportunity to live their lives, to work and to play.
And case in point, he's talking to the folks in Pinconning. He was talking to the folks at Northwood. He goes everywhere to bring that message of economy, jobs, and to listen.
Well, he does, and thank you for alluding to Northwood. He was asked to come to Northwood to speak about energy issues, and he made his case. And, that's the thing. He is speaking about energy issues all the time, everywhere. But not just that. He's asked to speak at a number of locales within his district, and he does. He takes every opportunity and talks about the very initiatives that he's been working on. And again, having served many years ago, over a 14-year stint, to watch what Representative Gary Glenn has been able to accomplish in less than 16 months is amazing. And one thing I didn't mention, speaking about accolades, just recently, the American Conservative Union Foundation named him as one of the awardees of their Excellence in Conservatism Awards. And I'm telling you what, there are other awards. I just can't remember them all. I can't keep up. It's stunning that what one person with intent and with good common sense family values, thinking in the best interest of a legislative district can do.
Mike Goschka, we're going to take a break right now, but we'll be back with Representative Gary Glenn Reports right after this. And Representative Gary Glenn Reports continues. I'm John Perry, joined by Mike Goschka from Representative Glenn's office. Mike, I know you've been getting some calls about an issue that has been in the news a lot lately. It's about the Michigan State Board of Education and what they call a guidance for school systems across the state, dealing with transgender students, questioning students, what have you. Is what the board is talking about here in Lansing maybe at variance from what Representative Glenn is hearing from constituents back at home?
Well, you raise a very timely question, because we are receiving a number of calls from constituents that are just amazed and appalled to think that all of a sudden, if you decide that you are, despite what your actual gender is, if you feel like you are of another gender, that you can just walk in and use a restroom. And of course, they talk about the restrooms. That could pass muster with some, certainly not with Representative Glenn and many of his colleagues. But what about locker rooms? Because that's part of it. So now you've got children, either gender, in their locker rooms, getting dressed, taking showers, whatever they're doing, and in comes someone of the opposite sex, but because they feel as though they are of that particular sex, they just walk in. This is opening up Pandora's box, and there's no question. Representative Glenn is very concerned about this issue for the safety and the health and the welfare, in particular, of children, but not just children, but for all of Michigan's residents. And so for the state school board to delve into this area and somehow pretend that someone of one particular sex is really not of that particular sex is quite astounding, to say the least. And so, yes, Representative Glenn and many of his colleagues are very concerned. They have raised this issue to attempt to bring some semblance of order back to the Michigan School Board, the state school board here in Michigan. So, children paramount. Their safety is what matters, and that's something that's being addressed.
Are you hearing from parents too, Mike, who are concerned that maybe they're being cut out of the loop because the guidance at one point says that parents should be part of the equation, but later in that same document says that if the parent calls the school, the employees there at the school can't tell the parents any decisions their own child has been making?
We've had constituents call and actually say and ask the question, why is the state school board trying to do an end run around my authority as the parent of my own child or our own children? And they raise a good question. This is coming from the district. This is something that people in the district, unsolicited, on their own, are calling our office. They're onto it. They've heard it, and I suspect that this is going on throughout the state. I would hope that common sense prevails. I know that Representative Glenn wants common sense to prevail and to end this notion before it gets anywhere off the ground. This is bad policy, And I know that Representative Glenn feels very strongly about that, as do the majority of the folks in his district.
And I know, too, a lot of times if someone calls up Representative Glenn's office, and we've talked about this, if they want to sit down and chat about this issue, any issue with the representative, you can make that happen.
Well, yes. And in fact, Representative Glenn regularly holds office hours on Fridays. He will hold them from noon to 1 in one of the cities or the village of Sanford, depending on the Friday. And then an hour later, throughout his district, he'll hold office hours in the various townships. Now, sometimes I will fill in for him in those office hours if he is involved in another meeting elsewhere. He can be in only one place at one time. He is not ubiquitous, although I sometimes think he comes across that way. He's everywhere. But we have constituents that will call concerned about a given issue. And they're quite surprised and pleasantly so when they're told, listen, Representative Glenn would be happy to meet with you personally. Let's set up a meeting right now, and he'll meet with you. And they say, really? Just like that? He'll meet with me. And yep, you've called, and what works for you? Where would you like to meet, and what time? We're going to put that in the calendar. He'll be there.
And I know the times that we have visited here, he has actually mentioned specific policies, ideas for legislation, amendments that have flowed out of that type of meeting.
Well, John, let me respond to that by only saying I know exactly what you're talking about. I will often receive either a text, an email, a phone call, or I might see them on over the weekend at an event that we're at, or perhaps on Monday. Hey, Mike, I just talked to a constituent who has an excellent idea for some legislation. So there we are. We're writing it down. We're pursuing it, calling the Legislative Services Bureau, and next thing you know, we are working on legislation. But that's how it's done. You know, it isn't that...
It's almost kind of the textbook example of how it's supposed to work, isn't
well,
it?
it is. It isn't that someone gets elected, so then they can operate from on high and just, well, they have free swing at whatever they want to do. No, Representative Glenn has taken the perspective that I'm a representative of the people, and I'm going to be in touch with the people. And as he hears from them, that's where I think, frankly, the best legislation comes from. It is the people, typically, who deal with the failings of government, and it's not always necessarily a big thing, but they can cut the red tape. And that's one thing that Representative Glenn views himself as. He's not just a lawmaker, but on occasion he's a law repealer. And, you know, if there's a bad law, let's get it out. If there's a law that needs tweaking, I've talked to my constituents, and that's what exactly what, you know, that's what he's entrusted me to do as his legislative director and chief of staff to work on those types of issues.
He is a lawmaker. He's a law repealer. He's also a watchdog, which is key because right now the House of Representatives is working its way through the budget season for the state's 2017 fiscal year. Anytime you're talking about a budget north of $53 billion, obviously it is important to have someone keeping a very close eye on how those dollars are being spent, isn't it?
Well, you're right. And something that I had taken note even last year when the budget process was working itself through is that there were probably about 4, possibly 5 amendments that he was able to get into the budget bill as it went back to the Senate. And the thing that struck me is there's no way that you get amendments through in any venue in this town if you don't have good working relationships with your colleagues. That's what it's about. It's building relationships. And, you know, he's been able to maintain his principles, what he stands for, what he believes in. He's exactly as he said he is. And yet, the relationships that have been built. And yes, he is about being a watchdog with the taxpayer's purse. It's nice to see someone that doesn't want to just spend money, but he really does treat that state budget as though it were his own personal bank account from the standpoint that we're just not going to spend, but we're going to save these taxpayers' dollars. And the dollars that we do spend, we're going to do our best to spend them wisely. I've watched him in meetings on that very issue fight for that taxpayer dollar. If people could see what I see, they'd be so pleased with what Representative Glenn does as a representative of the people.
We talked about it a year ago when it comes to at-risk funding for schools in the representative's district, and I know this year again, as the budget cycle continues, that is an issue he is once again focused on.
Well, he is. He has worked with Mike Sherrill, the superintendent of Midland Public Schools, as well as Jerry Wasserman, who's also on the school board, is the president of the school board. The at-risk funding issue deals with back in the old days of 20J funding, when Proposal A was passed, a mechanism whereby the more well-to-do schools, you might say, those districts, were able to raise additional funding for their schools, and they were known as 20J schools. Well, that's been done away with, but we now have what is at-risk funding. So you take a Midland that has about 28% of its students and at-risk funding, but because they were a 20J school, they received no at-risk money. So all schools in the state that did not fall under the 20J status, per student they receive a certain amount of funding because these are higher at-risk students. Well, Midland, with 28% of its students being at risk and not receiving a penny more, Representative Glenn couldn't believe that. So
common sense.
Oh, it's common sense. He went right to work on that issue. It's going to be a work in progress. I know that Representative Kelly from Saginaw Township has been very supportive. And they've not been able to get it through that whole process yet, but he was able to get an amendment added that finally did get stripped, but he's not given up. That's an issue that he cares a lot about. He wants to see equity, and we don't have that right now.
We talked about meeting with constituents, listening to constituents as we start to wrap up here today. Folks should clearly keep an eye open, an ear open for opportunities to sit down, meet, gather with the representative or with yourself. For that matter, too, I would imagine you're always a phone call or an email away.
We are all of that, certainly. He wants us as his staff to be very visible. He wants us to be accessible and to respond and to return calls and to do our jobs. And so that's been something that has been refreshing to see someone who isn't just elected to enjoy the good life, so to speak, and the so-called perks. For him, there are no perks. It's about doing the job. And that's why he got elected. That's what he cares about. That's been his focus. And, you know, I really appreciate working for someone who's so genuinely focused on doing their job, working for the people.
Mike Goschka, thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the many years of service you give in our state.
That's right.
Most people may not realize that, but you've been wonderful to work with over these many years, John.
Thank you, Mike. And for Representative Gary Glenn Reports, I'm John Perry. Thank you for joining us.